All right, so let's go ahead and get started. This is where we're at today. So if I don't get to look at you in the eye, I do apologize. I will try to get every one of you eye contact as much as possible, okay? So we've been going through this series called Coming Together. We've been working through the book of Acts, and we decided, Luke wrote this book, and it's not necessarily another gospel, but it's more of a story of how this ministry took off after Jesus left. After Jesus rose from the dead, He ascended into heaven, and now the church is starting to spread like a wildfire, right? And so to give you a little background, we're going to be in Acts 21 and 22 today. But before we get there, I just want to give you a little bit of background on what's been happening prior to these chapters. So previously, Paul comforted his disciples after a huge riot broke out in the city. And his disciples were in shambles. They were like, these people don't like us. They don't like what we're talking about. And Paul said, hey, it's okay. Let's get a game plan. So he comforts his disciples. He makes sure they're all right. And then he goes, all right, you're good to go. I'm going to send you out. So then he sends his disciples out, much like Jesus did when he said, Jesus brought the disciples in. And he said, look, I know you guys are struggling. Let's rejuvenate. Let's reset. And then they reset. They rested. And Jesus said, now I'm going to send you out. And you're going to do the same things that I've been doing. And the disciples were like, Jesus, you're crazy. But he sent them out. And they came back and they said, Jesus, we did what you did. Like, we healed people and we casted out demons. Like, isn't that crazy? He said, that's what I told you we were going to do. Like, why didn't you believe me? So Paul sends out his disciples. Then Paul raises a man from the dead. So Paul is teaching. And during his teachings, this man's sitting up in a windowsill. And I guess Paul was a little dry that night because the man falls asleep. And he falls out the window and he dies. And everybody's like, oh my gosh. Paul said, it's all right. I got this. He raises the man to life with the power of the Holy Spirit within him. And then Paul is being arrested and he's at a temple now. And so we're going to pick up. But before we get there, I want you guys to know that go ahead and throw the sermon title up there for me, Zach. Today, we're coming together. And the title is A Story to Tell. And it's quite simple as this. I'm going to use the word testimony a lot. And what we're about to look at is Paul's testimony to the people who quite frankly don't want anything to do with Paul. And before we get there, I want to tell you what a testimony is. So a testimony is basically a story of moving from death to life. From a life with Christ to a life, or with a life without Christ to a life with Christ. And so we're going to dive in. Picking up in chapter 21, if you'll throw that up on the screen for me. Chapter 21. 22, okay. I'm going to start in 21. So, chapter 21, verse 37 says this. All right? It says, when the 7 days were almost completed, the Jews from Asia, seeing him, being Paul, the temple, they stirred up the whole crowd, laid hands on him, crying out, men of Israel, help! This is the man who is teaching everyone, everywhere against the people and the law in this place. Moreover, he even brought the Greeks into the temple and has defiled this holy place. So what's happening at this point is these people are ticked off with Paul. They said, that's the man that is defiling the temple. He's bringing in people who should not be in the temple. He is saying that this Jesus man actually raised to life, and we know that's not true. And he's totally crazy. He's irate. We need to get rid of him. So what ends up happening, and we're not going to read it, but what ends up happening is they seize Paul. They literally start beating Paul up. And the tribune hears this, the government hears this, and they run with soldiers down there. They're like, we can't have a murder on our hands. So they run down, they see Paul, they get the people off of Paul. They then put Paul in handcuffs. And it says in the passage that they have to literally carry Paul to the barracks because the people are so violent towards Paul right now. So they're carrying Paul, and we're going to pick up in chapter 22, and this won't be on the screen, but it says, brothers and fathers. Paul gets them, he looks at the people that are carrying him, he says, hey, can I talk to the people? And they're like, are you kidding me? Like, these people, they want to hurt you. And Paul says, just please, let me talk to them. It says in 21 verse 40, it says, and when he had given him permission, Paul, standing on the steps, motioned with his hands to the people. Mind you, he's handcuffed. He motioned with his hands to the people. And when there was a great hush, he addressed them in the Hebrew language, saying, and we're going to pick up there, but before we get there, I'm going to pause. So I'm trying something a little different today. We're talking about testimony. I want to give you a testimony of one of my friends. Had his permission to share it. And so we're going to bounce from Paul's testimony to his testimony, okay? So I'm going to make it clear where we're going, but I want to tell you a little bit about this guy that I'm really close to, I'm friends with. And his testimony was this. He grew up He's a good guy. He knew God. He grew up going to church. He had a mom and dad at home. He had a brother and a sister. It was a good family. He grew up with good parents at home, and he loved it. Life wasn't difficult per se, but it wasn't, the family wasn't rich. They lived paycheck to paycheck. There were plenty of nights when it was peanut butter and jelly for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, but that's all right. He was cool with that. Good family, good brother and sister. And as he got into high school, things got a little hairy. His mom had just had 2 brain surgeries. His dad would just finish schooling but could not find a job, and he was struggling. The family was struggling. And his freshman year of high school, his family got evicted from their house. They suddenly were sitting there. Mom couldn't work, 2 brain surgeries. She was still having trouble functioning properly. Dad couldn't find a job, so they were evicted. Okay? So we're going to pause there. We're going to jump back to Paul's story, okay? So Paul, he said, can I address the crowd? And it says that he addresses them in their native language, which is Hebrew. And so the first point I'll make is this, you guys. A testimony cannot be given without a common ground to stand on. That's our first point. A testimony cannot be given without a common ground to stand on. And Paul shows us this by speaking in their native tongue. So he knows these people are already ticked with me. They're already really upset at what I've said, of what I've done. So I'm going to speak to them in their native tongue. That is his foot in the door. Now we're going to pick up in verse 3. It says this. He gets them all quiet down. He says, all right, listen to me. So picking up chapter 22, go ahead and throw that on the screen, verse 3. It says this. He says, I am a Jew. I was born in Tarsus in Cilicia, but brought up in the city, educated at the feet of Gamaliel, according to the strict manner of the law of our fathers, being zealous for God, as all of you are this day. I persecuted this way to death, binding and delivering to prison both men and women, as the high priest and the whole council of elders can bear me witness. From them I received letters to the brothers, and I journeyed towards Damascus to take those also who were there and bring them in bonds to Jerusalem to be punished. So Paul, he's speaking in Hebrew, so that's his foot in the door. And realize that Paul's not building himself up here. He's doing quite the opposite. He's tearing himself down. He's like, look, I'm a terrible person. Like, I used to be living in death. I didn't have Christ. He said, I get you being zealous and being on fire because I was like that. I was so ignorant to the fact of what was truly happening in front of me that I was tearing the church apart. You see, Paul, he doesn't build himself up, but he's explaining how terrible his life was before he knew Christ. So moving back to my buddy, they just got evicted, right? Him and his family had just got evicted. And so they moved states. And that's no fun in high school, moving schools, but moving states. So he's away from all of his friends. Then that summer, he's in the living room with his dad when his dad gets a call from the doctor. The doctor says he's got cancer. It's a very curable cancer, but it's cancer nonetheless, and it shakes my buddy to the core. That was his hero. And suddenly he sees his hero having a weakness, and he's broken. And so he's moved to his new state. He's got no new friends. He doesn't want to make new friends. He's upset. He's bitter. He's angry with God, right? And so he starts reaching out to sin, and he begins to get in this deep cycle of sin. So I feel bad. I don't want to. It's this cycle of, yes, I feel terrible, so I'm going to run to something that I think will make me feel better. And he runs to that, and it may make him feel better for a split second, but then he feels 10 times worse. And then he gets lonely again. He does it again. And it's just this cycle. We've all been there, right? The cycle of sin, the cycle of loneliness, this cycle that's just dark and deep. Okay? We'll move back to Paul. In verse 6, Paul's still talking to the crowd. He said, as I was on my way, I drew near to Damascus. And about noon, a great light from heaven suddenly shone around me. I fell to the ground, and I heard a voice saying to me, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? And I answered, who are you, Lord? He said to me, I am Jesus of Nazareth, whom you are persecuting. Now those who were with me saw the light, but did not understand the voice and the one who was speaking to me. And I said, what shall I do, Lord? And the Lord said to me, rise and go into Damascus, and there you will be told all that is appointed for you to do. And since I could not see because of the brightness of the light, I was led by the hand of those who were with me, and I came into Damascus. And one, Ananias, a devout man according to the law, well spoken of by all the Jews who lived there, he came to me, standing beside me and said, Brother Saul, receive your sight. And at that very hour I received my sight, and I saw him. And he said, the God of our fathers appointed you to know this will, to see the righteous one and to hear a voice from his mouth. For you will be a witness for him to everyone of what you have seen and heard. And now why do you wait? Rise and be baptized. Wash away your sins, calling on his name. The second point I'll make is this. Is everybody's testimony has a defining moment on whether you trust God or you run from God. There's always going to be that defining moment of, do I want to lean into the Father, let him catch me, or do I want to run the opposite way? And that's what Paul's having here. He's literally blinded on the road. That would make me angry. I'd be scared, but I'd also be angry at whoever did it, right? And Paul has this choice. Do I go to Damascus still, find this Ananias dude, and maybe see if he can heal me, or do I just run back home? Do I turn away from this God who just blinded me? We all have that moment in our testimony, a defining moment where you can either run to God or you can run away from God or you can trust God. And Paul says, what do I have to lose? I've lost it. I can't see. I can't do anything. At this moment, Paul suddenly dropped down the food chain a few notches, right? He was this guy, a zealous Jew, a zealous Pharisee. He was persecuting and executing the church. And all of a sudden he's blind. And he's not a leader anymore. He's being led by the hand, like a lost dog. And he has to rely on somebody else to help him. So my buddy, he's in this deep cycle of sin. And the sin doesn't stop. It continues. And he's struggling. Good news is he calls and says, hey, Dad's getting better. So Father, they got rid of the cancer. Dad's getting better. It's back on the ups. But through his father's sickness, there was a shift in the family dynamics. His brother and sister started lashing out, doing stuff that they probably shouldn't do. He was already doing stuff that he shouldn't do. And he was struggling eternally with his own self, with his own spirits. And it was time for him he graduated high school, it was time for him to go to college. So he went to college. He felt guilty for going to college. He didn't want to leave his brother and sister with mom and dad, not because they were bad parents, because they were awesome parents, but they were just struggling. You know, Dad still didn't have a job. Mom was looking for a job now, but she was still struggling to find work, and it was rough. But he knew he had to go to college, so my buddy, he went to college. So we're going to pick back up here in verse 17, and this will not be on the screen, and I'll go ahead and read it. It says, when I had returned to Jerusalem, I was praying in the temple. I fell into a trance, and I saw him saying to me, make haste, get out of Jerusalem quickly, because they will not accept your testimony about me. And I said, Lord, they themselves know that in one synagogue after another I imprisoned and beat those who believed in you. And when the blood of Stephen, your witness, was being shed, I myself was standing by and approving and watching over the garments of those who killed him. And he said to me, go, for I will send you to the Gentiles. Again, there's another moment. Paul has a decision to make. God says, look, they're not going to accept you here. Paul says, but nobody else will. Because if I go to any other place, they know my reputation. I'm a bully. God, I persecuted the church. I tore the church apart. I tore families apart. I even watched Stephen and approved of Stephen being stoned to death. And God says, you got to get out of here. And you're no longer going to minister to the Jewish people. No. You're going a complete opposite way. And you're going to minister to the Gentiles. Paul suddenly leaves. He follows God. And he gets a ministry through his testimony, and his life has changed forever. Paul, once known as Saul, once a persecutor, will now become the persecuted. He will go through many, many trials, many, many pains, many, many heartaches. But you will see Paul more joyful than he has ever been in his entire life. All for the glory of God. So my buddy, he sought help for his sin when he got to college. He got around people and they were like, look, you got to figure this out. So with some help with some friends and some mentors, he got past that. He got out of that cycle. But he was still facing these demons of insecurities, of anxiety, depression, of loneliness. He was still struggling with that. A couple years into college, he and a couple buddies, they got to talking. He said, hey, we should start a ministry for the homeless. And so they did. And they started a ministry for the homeless people. And they went down every week and fed the homeless. They went down every week and they lived life with the homeless people. And he saw more Jesus there, downtown in the city, with drug addicts and pimps and prostitutes and rapists and murderers. He saw the love of Jesus be spread more down there than he's ever seen at any church. And that helped him. Helped him so much. It brought his spirits up so much. His family got better. His mom and dad both got jobs. Sister had a kid. His brother's doing well. He graduated from college. 2 days before graduation, he got a call from a small church in Somerset, Pennsylvania. And they said, hey, we're looking for a youth pastor. Will you come be our youth pastor? He didn't know what he was getting into, but he decided, sure. What's the worst that could happen? And that's my story. And I share that testimony with you guys to say this. So we all have a testimony, church. We all have a story. Paul had a story. These people don't receive his story very well. He tells them it. And they yell and they get angry. But that's the luck of the cards sometimes, church. I was on a plane ride home yesterday, and a guy sat beside me and said, what's your story? I said, I'll tell you. His name was Anthony. I'll never see Anthony again. But I told Anthony my story, and afterwards he said, thanks, man. I really appreciated that. We all have a testimony to share. And we look at this testimony thing and we think, well, I don't have that blinding moment. I didn't have that blinding moment. I didn't know that with my dad getting sick and with me going through the cycles of sin and with my family dynamic falling apart, I didn't know that was my Jesus moment. But somewhere down the road, God said, hey, you have to trust me or you have to run. What's it going to be? So I've got a challenge for two different groups in here today. First one is this. If you've been a believer for any amount of time, you've got a story. And you say, Shay, I don't have that. Nobody got sick, or I didn't cut that. Because here's the truth. You're probably not going to realize you have a story until after the fact. It doesn't just hit you. We're not all Paul. God doesn't decide to just speak to us all of a sudden. It takes time. And if you have been a believer for any amount of time, this is my challenge to you this week. I want you to figure out what your testimony is. I want you to pray and lean into God and say, God, show me what my testimony is. And then I want you to share it with one person. And I don't want it to be somebody you're comfortable with either. I don't want it to be your spouse or your brother or your sister or your mom or your dad. I want you to pick somebody. Whether it's somebody you know, whether it's somebody you don't know. Don't be comfortable with them. And see what seeds can be planted through that testimony. That's the first group. That's the first challenge. Second challenge is this. If you are not a believer of Jesus, maybe you've just been coming to church for a while and you're like, what is this testimony thing? Like, I have an awesome story, but I don't know where God is in it. And I haven't accepted Jesus like Paul accepted Jesus. Realize that when Ananias got done healing Paul, he didn't just stop. He said, what are you waiting for? Let's go get baptized. Like you've done it. You're almost there. Take that last step and say, as a physical proclamation, I believe in Jesus Christ. Be baptized in the waters of baptism. And Paul says, all right, let's do it. And realize it didn't get easier. No, Paul's world got flipped upside down after he said, I believe in you, Jesus. It didn't get easier. It got more difficult. That's not to say that Paul's life was miserable, but like I said at the beginning, he went through trials and hardships, but boy, when you look and read Paul's writings, he is so happy. Many people are like, why? But if that's you, if you're saying, I have a story, but I don't know if I have a testimony, and I don't know who this Jesus guy is, but I want a relationship with him, come talk to me after service. I'm going to be down here. I'm not going to be in the back today. I'm going to be right here up front. Come talk to me. Let's talk about what it looks like to make Jesus your personal Lord and Savior. And say, God, I believe in you. I want you to make me part of your story, and I want to make you part of my story. Come talk to me. All right? I'm going to go ahead and pray. The praise team's going to come out here. So yeah, if you pray with me. Father God,